Welcome to Harlow on Healthcare. I'm David Harlow, and I invite you to join me by my virtual hearth as I sit down with healthcare leaders to discuss building the future of healthcare. Today, my guest is Shai Policker. He is the CEO of the MEDX Xelerator, a medtech incubator based in Israel. It's formed as a partnership between Boston Scientific, MEDX Ventures, Intellectual Ventures, and Sheba Medical Center, under the auspices of the Israel Innovation Authority. Shai's been in the med device business for over 20 years in industry, and he's been the CEO of this incubator with a strong U.S. affiliation as well. He has a technical background with a degree from the Technion in Israel and a business degree from Columbia in the U.S. Shai, welcome to Harlow on Healthcare.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
So, Shai, I wonder if you could start by giving us a little bit of thumbnail sketch background on yourself and on your organization, sort of winding that up with a statement of what your current priorities might look like.
I've been with the incubator since 2017. We actually started investing in March 2018, invested so far in 8 companies. Personally, I'm a veteran of the medical device industry for just over 20 years. Started in Israel, then moved to New Jersey, where I spent around 9-10 years, and operating in different companies, all startups, different indications, different fields. Mostly active implantable device, neurostimulation. Started in heart failure. Also did some things in the gastroenterology area. The last company I worked with was endostim, a neurostimulator for reflux disease, where we took an idea from just drawing on a whiteboard all the way to several $1 million of sales in Europe and South America and Asia. As I said, in the incubator, we've started investing about 2 years ago. What we are looking for mainly are ideas that could be as early as they can be. Sometimes as early as drawing on the back of an envelope, but taking them all the way to significant milestones where they can raise the next round of funding. For every idea, we are providing up to about $1 million in funding from our partners and in collaboration with the Israeli Innovation Authority, which provides the funding as a grant as well. So altogether, the companies are starting with about $800,000, and they can get somewhat more, even slightly more than $1 million for the first 2 years. And we work very closely with the companies, my team and myself. The companies are working in a very capital-efficient way, trying to get as far as possible on a small budget. And this is basically what I've been doing, I think, in most of my life in the medical device industry. Our areas of interest are, as you can imagine, things that are in the areas of interest for Boston Scientific and our other partners. So we are looking into cardiovascular, urology, endoscopy. Peripheral intervention is an important area for us, and medical robotics is also something that we have a specific interest on. We try to do things that have significant impact. We wouldn't do like a Me Too product. It could be a PMA or the novel device. Also, we would not do any biologic or pharmaceuticals. We are focused exclusively on medtech.
I see. And I wonder if you can give some color for some who may not be familiar with the Israeli startup scene. They're phrases that we use. It's Israel is referred to as a startup nation. We talk about the Silicon Wadi. I'm wondering if you can give a sense. I mean, you mentioned having spent time in New Jersey, and I try to describe to people who may not have been to Israel. The country of Israel is about the size of New Jersey. And I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit about how you and the tech scene in Israel are connected to other folks around the world, how this works.
So there's definitely a very vibrant medical device scene and generally innovation scene in Israel. And medical devices is a very, very strong area of interest for Israeli engineers. And many of the engineers, like myself, that graduated from technological army units, army intelligence, when they leave, they want to do something meaningful that can help the general public. And healthcare is a very strong area of interest. I can tell you that some people from my team, as well as some of the CEO of the companies that we recruited, are all coming from this kind of an environment. People that are used to handling multidisciplinary problems, technical, scientific, and it's, I would say, almost natural for them to tackle the multidisciplinary nature of the medical device, let's say, projects or problems that we're trying to face. Usually in medtech, it's not enough to understand physiology. It's not enough to be a good engineer. You have to marry the two expertise. You have to be able to communicate well with physician, understand the need, and bring innovation and understanding from both areas, both the engineering side and the physiology, biology side. This is the Innovation Authority calls it bioconvergence, getting innovation from both sides of this both sides of the world, if you wish, and integrating this into a smart solution. And this is what we try to do also in the incubator. We try to bring together good engineers and physicians with innovative minds. And when they sit together and start brainstorming, amazing things happen. And this is how we can found a very promising company.
So, Shai, how would you say that the COVID-19 pandemic has shifted priorities for healthcare innovation? And what particular areas do you see as attracting more attention because of the pandemic?
So I think that I wouldn't say that COVID-19 created new areas, especially except maybe for the corona specific areas of research. I would say that the COVID-19 and all the changes in lifestyle that this brought about in Israel and surely also in the US and in Europe and all over the world, it actually accelerated some trends and dramatically accelerated some trends that started moving slowly even before COVID. So the whole idea of treating patients at home, avoiding getting the patient to the hospital or to the clinic, remote monitoring, and treating chronic patients while minimizing their need for arriving at the hospital. This is something that was out there as a need for, let's say, saving costs even before, and there was innovation in this area before. But what we are seeing now is something that I don't think anybody has seen before or could even predict. If you look at just the report of what happened as late as April, there was something like 50% reduction in U.S. hospital visits in April. This came up from the Commonwealth Fund report. There is a poll of patients saying that more than 40% of them canceled their visits to doctor offices, to their specialists, because of the fear of getting infected. And we are talking about patients that are not the youngest patients. They are usually not the earliest of the doctors, and they would usually prefer to sit, in front of their doctors, talk about the changes in the situation, and have a face-to-face discussion, and have the doctor actually check them. And suddenly you see a dramatic change. Those same patients that would never think about not coming to the office or using a computer for a doctor's visit, they are now they wouldn't hear about going to a hospital. And that's something that takes technologies that are already out there, improving them and adopting them to become more and more useful to what's going on in the world. Because those patients are not, they have to see the doctor. If they continue to skip the doctor visits, then other, worsening of other diseases will happen, and mortality will increase without even the COVID. This would be this already is a side effect of the corona pandemic. So what we are trying to see is how we can harness innovation in order to support that activity. And some of our projects that are already underway are directly exactly to that point. I'll give you maybe some examples that we have. The first company that we invested in the incubator is a robotic microcatheter. So this is for the cath lab, where you would allow a physician, a cardiologist or interventional radiologist to do a catheterization on a patient. Today, the physician needs to be very, very close to the patient, actually pushing and pulling the catheter in order to get to the blood vessel and treat the patient. This is an issue for the physician because they are getting a lot of radiation, and it's an issue for the patient that if they want the number one specialist, they sometimes have to travel many miles to the hospital very far from where they live. So the idea of remote surgery is something that has been flying around, but cost and the kind of cumbersome setup of those robots was a little bit of a roadblock to that. So our first project was a fully disposable robotic microcatheter, where the idea is that you would be able to get a device that costs more or less the same amount as a off-the-shelf catheter today, but it's fully robotic and remotely connected to a site. And then you can have a patient be in the room with a robot connected to it, and the expert can be in the other room or 1,000 miles away operating on the patient with just a nurse observing and checking that everything is going well. So that's one kind of a situation. Another type of innovation is something that we've done or are doing in the area of dialysis, where you have very sensitive patients, very fragile patients, and the nurses and they have to come to the dialysis center to get the dialysis. There are some home dialysis, but the vast majority of patients are coming to dialysis centers, and the nurses need to touch them and be around them when they do the initial checkup and when they disconnect them. So we are bringing to the market an imaging system that will allow the nurse to be something like 5-6 feet away from the patient while doing all the series of checks that they need to do on the patient without actually touching the patient. And you can get, there are other benefits as well, where actually making sure that all the testing and the questions and the checks on the patient are being done, but also it allows the nurse to be very diligent without compromising, the fact that she doesn't want to be near the patient because of infection. And there are other projects similar to that. We are looking also into the respiratory field, looking into the area of respiratory physical therapy recently, trying to do as much as possible, provide as much care for the patient without requiring that the medical staff has to be in actual contact with the patient in the same room or touching the patient. Sometimes even getting the staff, a few feet away behind a glass wall can make a world of difference if you're talking about high-risk patient or a high-risk situation.
It's really a different way of thinking about telemedicine, if you will. If you're just tuning in, this is Harlow on Healthcare, coming to you on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm David Harlow, and my guest today is Shai Policker, CEO of the MEDX Xelerator. Shai, the idea of sort of transitioning or broadening the definition of telemedicine, I think, is an important one. At the beginning of the pandemic, as you alluded to, the adoption of telemedicine generally is fairly low. And now there's a growing understanding of the need to avail ourselves of the telemedicine, telehealth, distance medicine tools that are available to us. And indeed, as you're describing, there's a need to expand the toolkit. And you're talking about some pretty significant expansions. I know one of your partners, one of your collaborators, Sheba Medical Center, had been involved in sending home to patients basically a telemedicine toolkit in some circumstances. As I recall, it was an iPad and a bunch of monitoring tools that would plug in, right? Sort of the Swiss Army knife approach, have a blood pressure cuff and a few other things for basic kinds of things. But you're talking about taking this to a whole other level and needing to integrate some of these things with a pretty significant technical infrastructure at both ends of the connection. I'm wondering, do you see the availability, do you see the readiness of the healthcare system broadly for tools like this? I mean, there's been a mix of excitement and I think disappointment for things like the Da Vinci robotic surgery machines, for example. Are the tools that you're talking about enabling surgeons and others to take those existing tools to a new level? That's sort of the sense that I got from some of your description, but I'm wondering how that's proving out.
Yes, I mean, first of all, as I said in the beginning, I think those trends were in place long before COVID-19, but the adoption was pretty slow. I think if we would wait enough time, we would see those trends taking place, and telemedicine and remote monitoring and closed loop drug delivery of patients happening. But COVID-19 really gave a boost to this, and technology in some areas it's ripe and just needs to be adopted. But in some other important areas, and I think, and you mentioned some of them, is not exactly there. And there are barriers to adoption for physicians and for patients that really limit that. And I think our job as innovators is to understand and resolve those barriers. And what I mentioned about robotic surgery, one of the biggest obstacles in robotic surgery today is the high cost of capital equipment that the hospital needs to purchase. And then there is a significant setup time because it's a new kind of way to perform the surgery. And the physician can spend 15, 20 minutes preparing for the surgery, doing things that they've never done before. If you can eliminate those two factors and bring together disposable robotics, like in the way like Endoways is doing the disposable catheter robotics, and bring to the physician a tool that looks very, very similar to the catheter or robotic tool that he's using today, without any capital equipment, with minimal setup time, this will help adoption tremendously. Because if you look at the generation of surgeons today, many of them know Da Vinci, many of them know other robotic systems. They want to use it, but and some of them are adopting faster than others. But those are the two big barriers that we have identified, and this is what we tackled in our innovation. And I think there are barriers like that in other areas as well. One good example that I can bring, perhaps, is in the area of diabetes. There was a lot of innovation in the last 10 years or so, or more even, trying to close the loop with diabetic patients, really avoiding a frequent visit to the physician, combination with a blood glucose meter and an automatic pump to provide insulin. If you can bring that closed loop drug delivery idea to other types of chronic illnesses, you may save a lot of visits, a lot of hospitalizations, and also a lot of cost, and potential infections in influenza or COVID in the winter.
Are you working with companies that are looking to expand that thinking into other disease states, or are there particular disease states that you think are good candidates for that kind of thinking?
We are in constant discussions with various strategic players in all those fields. We try to learn from them and also provide some innovation and collaborate. I think the work with Boston Scientific, of course, has been very, very fruitful for us, but we work with other players as well. If I'm looking at the fields that would benefit the most, then I think the respiratory support is something that can definitely get a significant boost in both monitoring and also care, but also in other areas as well.
Right. I think some of the CPAP companies have been doing a lot of work in terms of gathering so much data and working on their algorithms. So I guess that may be transferable to other respiratory care kinds of issues. And I'm sure that kind of collection and development happens in other lines of respiratory care as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So other kinds of solutions that you see on the horizon, other fields of endeavor that you think are ripe for innovation here?
Well, there is a lot. I don't think we have time to talk about all the things that we are seeing, but in general, I can tell you that one of the few positives of this special situation is that it does induce innovative thinking with people, both with physicians and also with, let's say, the general population with inventive thinking. Necessity is the best source of innovation. So right. People are seeing their elderly parents, trapped at home with the chronic disease, unable or unwilling to go to the hospital. And they're thinking, what can I do? And if this is an engineer or a young physician, then they eventually come up with a better idea than how things are done today. And we encourage all these people to come to us, and we see a lot of great ideas here recently.
I think it certainly focuses the mind. I guess I'm wondering also if there are additional challenges beyond the obvious, sort of the physical distancing that's required, other challenges that you see at this time?
Well, I mean, switching gears to a completely different aspect is funding. I think the fact that we as business people and operators of companies are not able to travel as before, puts us in a really strange situation. I think there is only so much you can do through Zoom and on the phone. We are trying to do the best we can, and we can, a lot can be done. But I think that this is also an aspect of business and innovation that will change. For example, we do a lot of collaboration with physicians around the world, physicians and universities around the world. And this is becoming more of a challenge. If you want to travel and do a study or an experiment in a lab somewhere, this is now much more difficult. And the way to control and train remote people to do what you want is also somewhat of a challenge. I've been spending the last 2 weeks trying to get a team into France to do an animal trial that we need to do. And there are a lot of collaborators that are used to traveling to Israel frequently, and same as myself. I've been in the US at least once a quarter, and now it's just impossible. So being able to deliver the ideas and get both funding support and operational support and just the new ideas across the ocean is becoming a little bit more of a challenge, somewhat like many years before.
Yes, it is a challenge. So, Shai, to wrap things up, I want to ask you, if you were to wake up tomorrow and find yourself 5 years in the future, what's one thing in healthcare that you would hope or maybe expect to find has changed dramatically?
I think that, it's a very good question, because I think more than one thing will change, even in just 5 years. I think if you step into many doctors' offices, you will find that they have, several screens in which they control some, monitoring or treatment facility, or in the same way, like somebody that is checking on, like a security guard is doing, and treating their physicians remotely. So the way the physician's office would look like, I think would look differently in 5 years from now. and you will see a lot more technology and electronics and screens on the desk of the physician and fewer patients.
That's an interesting vision for the future, sort of a mix of what we're seeing today and what we've seen in the past, and thinking forward to what we may see in the future. Well, Shai, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You have been listening to Harlow on Healthcare. Join us at healthcarenowradio.com. Let's continue the conversation on building the future of healthcare together at #HarlowOnHC. I'm David Harlow, keeping the fire going and holding a seat open for you. Until next time.